Hi, this is Patrick Shaughnessy. This is another video about features in LMMS. I'll be covering the Effects tab and the closely related Effects Mixer interface. This button here brings up the Effects Mixer. The Effects tab is in the Instrument interface. I've gone through the Plugin and LFO and Funk tabs, and FX is next. The Effects chain can be turned on or off. There's a little light for that. If it's on and the effects chain is empty, that doesn't do anything. And if it's off, it doesn't do anything. When you have it on and you have an effect in the chain, then the effect gets a chance to do something. So I'm going to add an effect. I'm going to add this effect here. I'll just use this one as an example. It happens to be a reverb. If we turn it off, this is the same instrument I've been using in previous examples. If we turn it on, you can see and hear that it affects the waveform. The output from the instrument goes to this effect before it goes anywhere else. And then we hear the output of this effect. Every effect has its own controls window. Every effect in the chain also has these three nodes in the chain itself that do things pretty much independently of which effect it is. The wet-dry mix between 0 and 1 says how much of the effect we're mixing in versus how much of the original signal. At 0, it's the same as if the effect were off. At 1, we get the full volume of the effect. At an intermediate level, we get some of the effect, but not as much. Negative numbers are also a thing. When you have a negative number, you're mixing with the inversion of the waveform of the effect. What that means is a little mathematical. Depending on the effect, it might sound like a very similar thing or like a very different thing. In this effect's case, it sounds pretty similar. The decay knob and the gate knob control whether the effect is on constantly or only some of the time. If I turn up gate, then the reverb continues until the volume gets below this gate level, and then the reverb cuts out. So that affects basically whether we keep the effect running after the original note is gone. For some effects, it doesn't matter because the effect only does anything while the note is playing in the first place. I chose reverb to have an example where gate would matter. And decay interacts with gate. It continues delaying for a certain amount of time longer than the gate. So, even though the gate's on, I also had decay, so the filter stayed on longer. Usually you won't need these. You can just leave your effect running full time and you're fine. But you have these options if you do need your thing to cut out. Maybe you made a really long decay for some reverb effect or other effect that lingers, but you do want to end. You can use decay and gate to make it end. Alright, so this is happening to this one instrument. If I had another instrument and I play it, that instrument doesn't get this effect. Or I could go into that instrument's effect chain, apply a completely separate copy of C star plate 2x2 with its own controls. If you want an effect to apply to a mix of multiple instruments, there's a way you can do that. So I'm going to turn off the effects chain for the instrument itself, and I'm going to open the effects mixer. One thing you can do in the effects mixer is in the master, add an effect that just applies to the entire song. So if I stick a reverb here, now the entire song gets this reverb. I can add another instrument to show that that's the case. And if you want to get more complicated with that, maybe you want an effect applied to just your string section and not your wind section or something like that. You can create an effects channel. Set that effects chain to have something going on. Let's pick a different one here, I guess. Nothing's what's happening now because this instrument isn't going into this effects channel. But if I do this, I'm dragging up. Now this instrument is pointing at effects channel 1, so it gets this chain. Whereas this, well, I already lead the other instrument, but the other instrument, if it had still been on effects channel 0, wouldn't have. You can also have the effects channel's volume go less into the final mix. And you also have separate volume sliders for each channel. Now this is called an effects chain. You can have multiple effects, and the output of one goes into the input of the next. Let's demonstrate how the chain works. Let's add an effect that does something obvious to the frequencies of the sound. Phasers should be a pretty obvious effect. Let's add a spectrum analyzer. No, not one of those. Let's add a spectrum analyzer. And let's add another spectrum analyzer. Let's get rid of that. I'm right-clicking to remove. I'm moving this one up now. So we're getting the reverb, which is turned off, spectrum analyzer, phaser, spectrum analyzer. So the signal is going through these in order. The output of the instrument goes to the spectrum analyzer. Output of the analyzer goes to phaser 2. Output of phaser 2 goes to the second analyzer. An analyzer isn't actually changing the sound. It's just letting us see it. So what we're going to see is these two analyzer windows will show us the sound before and after the phase. So on the left we see the sound as it's coming straight out of the instrument since it's not getting reverbed. And on the right we saw this one, which is showing it with the phaser in effect. If we add the reverb to this chain, then the reverb will happen before the phase. The order of effects in the chain can be something subtle that you just have to listen out, but conceptually you can just think of each of these as a little box with an audio cable going in and an audio cable going out. So that's all the basic ideas of how these effects work. You can put them on an instrument, on the master, or on an effects channel. You can control how much level you actually use of the effect versus the original signal. You can chain them together. You can configure how long they stay after the note ends if necessary. What I haven't talked about is this giant list of filters that come with LMMS. There are a lot of them, and I'm not planning to go through all of them, but there are some that I use a lot, and I will talk about those in a future video.